Hey there, Hall H Show listeners. Aaron Nabus here, and on this episode, we're joined by one of my favorite comic book creators, the writer and co-creator of Spencer and Locke, Mr. David Pepose. How you doing, David?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. Spencer and Locke is also drawn and co-created by Jorge Santiago Jr. We last had David on the podcast back in episode 22. Can you believe it's been 2 years? I think it was San Diego Comic-Con 2017.
Wow. It's time flies.
I know. We've kept in touch, and I've seen David at events and at panels that our good friend Rylend Grant has organized.
Yep.
I love Spencer and Locke and its tagline, "What if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City?" I also love and appreciate that David took some time out of his busy schedule today to not only talk about Spencer and Locke, which hits stores on, I believe it's May 1st, 2019.
Right. Yep.
But he's also going to talk about his other book, Go to the Chapel.
Yeah, Going to the Chapel. I'm really excited to talk with you about both of these books. They couldn't seem more different, but they have a nice shared DNA between them, and I'm excited for readers to pick them both up.
Sweet. So, David, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for your support of Spencer and Locke, and for coming to all of our panels. It's always great to see you there covering us, and thank you for fighting for us in the trenches.
You're welcome. The pleasure's mine. I guess we'll go right into Spencer and Locke 2.
Yeah.
Why don't you update us on the story? I mean, what's new in Spencer Locke? I know you have a new villain there, Roach Riley.
Mm-hmm. Well, if our first volume of Spencer and Locke was "What if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City," we're taking the Fables approach for volume 2, and no comic strip is safe anymore. Hard-boiled detective Locke and his imaginary Panther partner Spencer are going up against a new big bad for our second volume, and his name is Roach Riley. He's kind of our homicidal riff on Mort Walker's Beetle Bailey. He's a former soldier who he's definitely seen some stuff overseas, some pretty sort of horrific, brutal stuff. And he's come back. We might see him as kind of shattered, but he would see himself as more of having sort of the scales fallen from his eyes. Roach has picked up a kind of twisted, nihilistic philosophy, excuse me, overseas. And you might even say he's picked up religion. And he's looking to spread the good word to as many people as possible. So, his fight with Spencer and Locke, it's not just a physical conflict anymore. It's really going to be just as much a war of ideas. I think for Spencer and Locke in particular, they're the products of trauma, of their own sort of abusive childhoods. And Roach has sort of sustained just as much pain and suffering over a much more accelerated time frame. And I think it's very easy to sort of take a very nihilistic approach when you're dealing with suffering like that. And that's not what Spencer and Locke are about. They're always trying to find meaning. They're always trying to sort of find redemption. They're always trying to find closure and move on from their scars. And that kind of mindset that Roach represents can be kind of seductive, especially when Spencer and Locke themselves are finding themselves at a real existential crossroads in our series. So it's very much the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. And it's going to be really exciting to show readers the kind of sparks that are going to fly off of this collision.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of collision, I'm looking at the first issue that you graciously let me preview. And the artwork is just amazing.
Thank you. Jorge is just... First off, the Ringo Award nominated artist, Jorge Santiago Jr. I never get tired of referring to him that way. We were all nominated for Ringo Awards for our contributions in Spencer and Locke Volume 1. And Jorge, I got to tell you, I mean, the whole team really has leveled up their game, and Jorge sort of sets the tone for the rest of us. He really has just one-upped himself now that he's so comfortable with the characters. And, he and I really know what each other's strengths are. And we kind of, our process for Volume 2 was so much more streamlined compared to Volume 1 because we knew each other already. And we had been working with each other for the better part of a year and a half already. So Yeah, he's really upped his game, and everybody else has followed suit. Jorge has talked about in other interviews that he's taken a different approach with his art style. He's used I believe he said it was different nibs for his pens and for the inks.
You can kind of tell with some of the motion.
Yeah. And on top of that, we're able to sort of take different sort of strains of genres to inject them in the art. Jorge, he got his start doing horror stuff with his series Curse of the Ill, which you can read online. And so we've been able to sort of take a little bit of cues from war comics and from horror comics and to kind of throw them into this noir-drenched Spencer and Locke universe. It's been a really cool way to reinvigorate what's already been a really exciting visual style. And it really feeds into sort of this pop-up, mash-up ethos that we brought to the first series. So Jorge is really terrific, and honestly, if you like what he does in our first issue, it's just going to get bigger and wilder and crazier from here. I can say we have previews out for issue 3 right now, and he gets sort of an otherworldly horror bent to the whole thing. It's really exciting working with him, and I keep telling him that I'll work with Jorge until the wheels come off. He's such an artist. He's so versatile. He really knocks anything that I throw at him out of the park, and I'm really excited for the rest of the world to see how much he's leveled up in Volume 2.
Nice. Yeah, it shows. I mean, out of curiosity, when it comes to panel layouts, is that more of a collaborative thing, or is that...
So that's, it's funny. I got my start, for people who don't remember me from the last time I was here, I got my start as an editorial intern at DC Comics. That was my sort of break into the industry, and then I served as a reviews editor at Newsarama for a better part of a decade. And so I have a lot of opinions on how you put together a page and sort of how can you stack panels together. And so Jorge and I, we talk a lot in terms of layouts and thumbnails, just sort of the very basic foundations of what the page is going to look like. I write my scripts with, sort of an idea in mind of how's this going to fit together. If you can fit X number of panels per page, how am I going to stack this? Which ones are going to sort of be the big moments on the page, and how are the other moments around it going to have to shift as a result? So Jorge and I, we're both pretty cerebral, and we probably overthink things a bit. So we'll email each other pages back and forth, just saying, okay, here's what we're thinking about this page. What do you think? Can we pull this off? And sometimes it's a case of Jorge being like, oh, I didn't think of it like that. That's a good idea. Other times he'll be like, that's a little ambitious. What if we did it this way? And so it's a nice sort of push and pull that I think at the end of the day, we rigorously interrogate every page just at the foundational level. And that makes it really easy, I think, just in terms of the construction of the page moving forward. I mean, he and I talk so much about panel layouts and thumbnails, basically sort of the stick figure version of what the page is going to look like, that, once we get into pencils, there's very little, if ever, any sort of, things that we have to tweak. And then by the time that we're in inks, I think I could name on one hand the number of times we've ever had to make a tweak on something that's been inked. It's really smooth, and then it kind of becomes like Christmas for me as the writer, where Jorge starts sending me pencils, and he starts sending me inks, and they look terrific and amazing, and that's the kind of feeling. It's really hard to describe if you haven't experienced it, especially working with somebody as talented as Jorge. So. Yeah, I mean, it's we talk a lot, and I do the same thing with our colorist Jason Smith. Because when I was at DC, they taught me that good color can elevate any artwork, but bad color can sink like even the strongest penciler and inker team. So, Jason and I, we talk a lot about sort of palettes and what kind of is the mood for this particular scene. And Jason, he really has stepped up his game for Volume 2. He's sort of added in his own spin on different types of color filters, which for the layperson, it might not sort of pop out at you, but it deals a lot with texture in terms of backgrounds. So, for example, we have a scene at a junkyard, and the way that he's sort of able to take a junkyard wall and make it look really mildewy and gross, it adds a lot of texture to Jorge's already incredible line work. And I'll say for our third issue, similar to how we did our sort of Spaceman Spiff riff in Volume 1, we have sort of another dramatic change of setting in issue 3, and the way that Jason really added a wonderful spin to Jorge's line work. It's like nothing else that you've seen in this series. It's an issue that has its own distinct visual identity, and it really looks gorgeous to look at.
Oh, I'm happy that Spaceman Spiff is coming back.
Well, so no Rocket Man Reynolds this time, but I promise you that we have something else very cool in its place.
Cool.
I'll say, one of the cool things about working on a book like Spencer and Locke is we're able to take some of that very distinct iconography that Bill Watterson established. Because, I mean, the man is a pioneer and a genius, and I don't pretend to think that I can lick his boots, let alone be at the same level as him. But there were bits of the iconography that we could not organically fit into the first series that I'm excited that we got a second crack at it. So we're able to sort of finish this unfinished business, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so much of this series is in Locke's head, and sort of his imagination and his mental illness kind of sometimes running away with him. He's the type of guy who's kind of hanging on to sanity by his fingernails. Mm-hmm. And my favorite bits of the series are what happens when he slips.
Yeah, exactly. Going back to the layouts as a graphic designer, I was looking at the issue that you forwarded to me, and it's so well laid out. From the just the word bubbles to the typography to, like you said, the colors, the art, and just the variety of different types of panels being used. It's like
that means a lot. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that, because the thing about working at an indie place like Action Lab, while they have submissions editors, like they do not have sort of the day-to-day editors who are kind of holding your hand and doing sort of the project management. That winds up falling on me. So that means a lot to hear you say that, just because I love sort of, taking point on this book. Like I was the one who brought the team together, and I was the one who came up with the initial idea. And, so being the traffic cop, so to speak, that's as a leader, that's kind of the role that I feel I'm responsible for. So I really appreciate you saying that, just that if you feel like it comes together nicely, it's because, this team is so top shelf that, I can come to them with, here's my idea, and they will execute it in a way that is so much better than I had. And it's really encouraging as a creator just to have a team that is so good at what they do that you can really kind of trust that the final product's going to look incredible.
I know the first arc of Spencer Locke was 4 issues. Will this be 4 issues as well?
Yes. And, part of that, some of that is practical. I want to keep myself and my team sane. Some of it's also, I don't want to keep readers hanging on any longer than they have to. I'm very cognizant that, this is the kind of book that you don't want to overstay your welcome on. We've had really diehard fans, but I feel like if this was an ongoing, for example, I think people would get tired of it. And while I think each arc that we've put together stands on its own 2 feet, it has its own unique direction and flavor and tone to it. I want to keep our storytelling feeling really lean. I'm not a huge fan of decompression in comics. I think single issues are so expensive that having kind of a filler issue defeats the purpose. I know readers are already taking on a big commitment just by, pre-ordering, by calling their comic shops and pre-ordering us for 4 months on end. So I want to make sure that every issue stands on its own 2 feet, has its own unique tone to it, It's similar to like Friends, where Friends, you have that episode. It's like the one where Chandler goes to the coffee shop, and like each episode had its own. It's the one where such and such happens. That's kind of how I like to put together my scripts. Is I can say that's the issue with the car chase. That's the issue where he becomes Rocket Man Reynolds. This is the issue of the trial of Spencer and Locke. That sort of easy, digestible chunk, I think, keeps readers on their toes a little bit, but it also makes it easier that readers don't just get bogged down and say, "Where am I in this series again?"
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's also for my sanity. The shorter the issues, the more focused it is, and the less likely I am to burn myself out or my team.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, I think I was reading some thread on a manga, and I know that a lot of manga sort of suffers from having a lot of filler in their issues. So, but it's pretty good that you're cognizant of that aspect of your book.
Heidi MacDonald called it the satisfying chunk, and I feel like that's really the only way that individual floppies are going to make sense moving forward. I mean, it's so easy to write for the trade, and there's an argument to be made for the cost effectiveness of singles. I see it as, there are still readers out there who like singles. It, practically it serves as a long marketing ramp up. I get to talk about this book for 6 months rather than 2 months. But if you're going to do singles, I think you have to justify each single. And so, if you really work hard at like saying, okay, each issue has to stand on its own 2 feet, you don't get sort of a fill-in or a filler issue. Your arcs start shrinking pretty quick.
Are all 4 issues already ready to go?
Oh yeah. We finished Spencer and Locke 2. I think it was November of last year. And that's the great thing about Action Lab. They're very cognizant of. There are publishers out there who they will solicit a book as soon as the contract is signed, and then they are shocked when the book is late. Action Lab is not about that life. They are very much. I believe it's in our handbook. I think we have to have 3 or 4 issues already in the can before they'll solicit us.
Okay.
I get that. I mean, even though there's like a very long lead up in between there, this is me sort of getting into the nitty gritty of it. But like, for example, I just approved this week the proofs for issue 3. And this is for a book that's been done since November.
Right.
So there's, of course, a long window to make changes as required, but having the book basically done so far in advance, that leads to that sort of time travel effect that you and I were talking about before we started recording. Is for me, I wrote this book ages ago, and then it took an extra I think 9 months to get the book made, and then you sort of get announced, but you're waiting for the pre-orders to show up, and it's a very extended production timetable, especially on my end as the guy at the beginning of it all. But yes, the book is done. Of course, there are always bumps in the road as far as Diamond is concerned.
I see.
So that can always be a moving target from time to time. And this happened with our first volume as well. I think we had something like 3 different dates for our first issue to drop. This happened with Volume 2 as well, that we are coming out, I think it was like a week later than Diamond had originally solicited. That's the sort of thing that I know that can be a hassle to comic shop owners. And so I apologize for that happening. I wish it was in our hands. But at the end of the day, like, setbacks happen in comics. It's not something that I try to get too worked up over, because it's just nothing I can do. All you can do is kind of just roll with it. So I see it as, we're coming out the week of Free Comic Book Day now. That's super exciting, and that's kind of in certain ways a bigger platform than I had expected with this book. but it's very exciting, and to sort of see people kind of coming into comic shops in droves just as Spencer and Locke 2 #1 hits stores. I'm really excited, and I really hope a lot of people discover our book that way.
Cool. I know that you sort of took inspiration from Beetle Bailey for Roach Riley, but
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did you even like come up with the notion to have a character like Roach Riley?
It's funny you ask that, because this has been in the cards since the beginning. I've had a short-term plan for Spencer and Locke, and then a long-term plan for them, and that's been since the beginning. Having a background in journalism, in addition to working at Newsarama, my first job out of college, I was a reporter at a newspaper. I covered crime and politics, and so I'm used to kind of writing modularly. You write sort of the 6-inch version, and then you write the 12-inch version, and there's maybe you get the most salient material out in that 6-inch version. But if you're able to sort of have more room to go in depth, that's where you sort of add more to it. That's the case in Spencer and Locke too. I said, people are going to be so distracted by the idea of, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City, that they're not going to realize that's the tip of the iceberg.
Mm.
I grew up reading the comic section in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch as a kid. And so Beetle Bailey, I've known of Beetle Bailey since I was a kid. And almost immediately when I said, hey, should I come up with other characters in this world, Roach was one of the first characters that came to mind, because it makes perfect sense. Our series is about trauma and mental illness and PTSD and violence, and that fits in with Beetle Bailey's military background so well. While Mort Walker never kind of had this lovable slacker private see any action, what if he did? And sort of how does that change this character? And sort of having that PTSD angle already so organically into it, and then having that advanced military hardware also so natural in the thing, and the fact that in our first volume we had Spencer and Locke, these two street-level cops. They dealt with street-level crime. It makes sense. What happens when they have to deal with something like terrorism? Something that's sort of so massive and larger than life. That was kind of really attractive to me as a writer, sort of seeing these two characters have to deal with something that's so much bigger than them and try to put a face on it, and then try to see, all right, how are they going to pull themselves out of this one? So it's been a long time coming. I have said that, and this is why pre-ordering our book is so important, that, every pre-order for Spencer and Locke 2 is essentially a pre-order for a volume 3.
Gotcha.
I really want to do a volume 3. Jorge and I have discussed it. We have plans. Action Lab has said, as long as your sales are not in the toilet, we would be interested in such a thing. So that's sort of, that's really the end game for me. I'm always thinking, a few steps further than where we're already at. And, there are a couple of comic strips that we're holding back, specifically for a volume 3. But in the interim, Spencer and Locke 2, it's not just Beetle Bailey. We've got our riffs on Brenda Starr, High and Lois, Dilbert, Haggard the Horrible. Nancy gets a fun cameo in our first issue. Jorge and I actually threw Nancy and Sluggo into our first issue before the Olivia James relaunch of Nancy, so I feel very ahead of the curve on that one. It's such a cool way to expand this world. There's so many different archetypes that you need in a particular story, and when I read the comics section as a kid, all these strips lived on the same page, so why wouldn't they live in the same universe? It's really exciting, and there's so many kind of fun winks and nods. Our eagle-eyed viewers are going to be really rewarded by seeing the sorts of stuff that Jorge throws into the backgrounds of our panels. As I said before, no comic strip is safe. But it's really fun kind of watching them all sort of come together to form this very kind of bleak, violent symphony, as it were.
You're making me feel nostalgic for a newspaper.
Yeah. Well, listen, you know what? Like, I that's how I got my start, and I've always kind of been surprised that nobody's tackled something like this before, because that's how how the whole industry got started. You look at the Yellow Kid, that was a newspaper sort of comic strip, and that was kind of how comics got their start. And so it's really cool just being able to sort of take that element of comics history that I think a lot of people overlook, or they sort of underestimate. They look at it through these very nostalgia tinged glasses, which, don't get me wrong, I love nostalgia just as much as the next person, but I don't want that to ever blind me to what the possibilities are for new storytelling. And so it feels a little like archaeology in a way. But it's also sort of, it's always been our intention. It's a love letter, first and foremost, to trailblazers and innovators like Bill Watterson, like Frank Miller, like Mort Walker. These guys were able to do so much, in particular Watterson and Walker. They're able to do so much in such a small amount of space. You only get, 3 or 4 panels to sort of pull off a full story. It's the kind of storytelling economy that we don't see anymore. And it's kind of nice to be able to take sort of that expanded canvas of a month-to-month comic and be able to still try to channel those same sort of sensibilities.
That's true. Last time we talked, you sort of touched upon the movie option for Spencer Locke. Is there any updates that you could give us on that?
Nothing. I can't say too much at the moment, other than we've had some really cool conversations going on about it. It's been really exciting. The fact that Hollywood seems to understand and embrace our book has been really exciting. I'm based in Los Angeles, so I've been sort of on the ground floor, dealing with a lot of this stuff, and I've been involved in our sort of our pre-production process in terms of putting together sort of our Bible, so to speak, of the series and the characters and sort of where we have in mind going forward with the series. And so all I can say is we've talked to some really cool people, some really talented individuals. And so I'm hoping we'll have some news that I can say publicly soon. I think especially now, given sort of the climate in LA, I'm not sure sort of how that affects things with the Writers Guild and all that. But I can say that things have been pretty cool at the moment. Fingers crossed. I'll have some cool news to share soon.
Definitely, I look forward to that conversation.
Me too.
I guess maybe we can shift gears to your other book, Go to the Chapel. You want to maybe give us the elevator pitch for that really quick?
Sure. Going to the Chapel is it's Die Hard at a wedding. It's the story of the world's worst wedding, and that was before it was taken over by bank robbers. It's a story of a bride who is grappling with a serious case of cold feet, and then her wedding is taken over by the Bad Elvis gang. Think of the dead presidents from Point Break, only wearing Elvis masks.
They're not the flying Elvises, are they?
What?
They're not the flying Elvises, are they?
Not the flying Elvises. But the Bad Elvises, without spoiling too much, it was supposed to be just a smash and grab. Unfortunately, no matter how professional these bank robbers are, they really could not expect how dysfunctional Emily's family is, Emily Anderson, our bride. And so it quickly devolves into a full-blown hostage situation where everyone is trapped inside this chapel, and how Emily, our bride, has to wind up playing both sides against the middle to get everyone out in one piece. So it's a love story at the end of the day. I felt that romantic comedies, they get a bad rap, both in general and I think in the direct market for comics. I feel like not a lot of direct market publishers do rom-coms, which and I think that speaks to a lot of preconceptions on what rom-coms are as a genre and who is allowed to consume them, which I find both to be nonsense. There's a lot. I think romantic comedies as a genre have just as much flexibility as something like crime or science fiction. You look at movies like About Time, which is kind of a sci-fi twist on a rom-com, or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, another sort of sci-fi twist on that. Or 500 Days of Summer. There's a lot of twists that you can take on what seems to be a pretty cut and dry genre. And I felt the direct market was in desperate need of catering to that audience. And I wanted to make sure – I wanted to write a romantic comedy that everybody would feel comfortable reading, that everybody could kind of come to the table and say, this is really cool. Like I joke that real men read Pink because that's what Going to the Chapel is about. It's sort of, yes, there's the wedding imagery, but it's also just like, the cool action sequences, and you got these kind of badass Elvis themed bank robbers at the center of all of it. Somebody told me at C2E2 we had some convention exclusives of the first issue. It'll be out later in the fall, and they said this is like 90s Julia Roberts starring in 90s Quentin Tarantino. And you know what? I will take that. That's honestly a huge compliment, and exactly the sort of thing that I was shooting for this book. Is I wanted something that like you could laugh at, but you could actually kind of feel this human core to, but also just be really excited about the cool action sequences. I think we've really hit that one. We're almost finished with full production on the series. We're just getting final colors down on the last two issues now. But I can tell you, Chapel, it's a different kind of beautiful than Spencer and Locke, but it's a really gorgeous looking book. I'm working with Gavin Guidry, who he kind of operates in that space between a Chris Somney and a Jamie McKelvey. He's really terrific. He's going to be the next big superstar. And then Liz Kramer. This is her first, both she and Gavin's first direct market work. But Liz, you can find her work on the webcomic Threader. And she is going to be the next Laura Martin. She is just such a frighteningly talented colorist that usually I have a lot of opinions on colors, and we'll have a lot of back and forth on it. I can say with Liz, once we sort of got down our sort of set tone and palette for the series, I've been just watching the pages come in and being like, wow, I don't have any notes for this. This looks great. Which is a new thing for me. And then we're, of course, working with veteran letterer Ariana Maher. She's working on $6 Million Man over at Dynamite right now. I believe she's come off of James Bond 007 and several other titles under her belt. And she's wonderful, just like Colin Bell over at Spencer and Locke. So much of my work relies on one-liners and readability. And so I think Ariana really sort of gives our dialogue the bounce it needs to make people laugh at it. And so, yeah, it's like, again, working with a real dream team. We've got a murderer's row of talent for covers for this series. I can't announce all of them just yet, but I can say that, Lisa Sturl from Submerged and Long Lost is working on has our first issue cover, along with Mon House, who's joining me from Spencer and Locke. As well as Gavin Guidry, who will also be doing a series of covers as well. So, like Spencer and Locke, I feel like Chapel's the kind of book that nobody thought could exist until it did exist. And yet at the same time, I think it's kind of this wild book that's very different from anything else in the stands, and one that I think tells a really human story that I think a lot of people are going to relate to.
Did you already know the people that were on your creative team for Going to the Chapel, or? So
Chapel's been a long time coming. Chapel, I actually wrote the first issue and treatment for Chapel right after Spencer and Locke. because and we may have discussed this in the last time I was there. I wasn't sure if I was going to do another book after Spencer and Locke. It was very contingent on how the reaction to that first book would be, because I thought for sure I was going to be in comic book jail. Like I thought, well, this book is going to come out and some people are going to love it and some people are going to hate it. And I don't know what that ratio is going to be. And if people hate this book, then maybe this is not the career path for me. But thankfully, people liked it. And I was the best man at one of my oldest friend's weddings. And without going into too much detail, the bachelor party that I planned was cursed. Like, cursed from the start. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. Like, the Airbnb was trashed. A bunch of groomsmen bailed. I was hospitalized 48 hours before the event, so I couldn't even go. And I thought, thank God it didn't happen during the wedding. And then I thought, what if it did? And that kind of became the script for this. And similar to Spencer and Locke, we shopped this thing all over town. And everybody said that they loved it and didn't know how to sell it, which is, I think kind of speaks to the comics industry as a whole. Is despite sort of people saying that they want to try new stuff, there's still, I think, a conservative streak of sort of wanting to play it safe. How can we hit X number of sales for this quarter? And if we can't guarantee that, it's not worth the risk. So this is a very roundabout way of saying that when before I pitched this to Action Lab, I wanted to make sure that we had a really top shelf team. And so Gavin, I found on Twitter, actually. He had just come off of a one-shot on Comixology called The Night Driver. And he was saying that he was looking for more work. And I was immediately like, wow, this guy's super talented. How's nobody scooped him up yet? And then I realized, like, oh, I guess it should be me. Pretty artists need love too. So I hit him up, and then it took a few iterations, I will say, for a creative team. We had some different colorists on the book, and based on scheduling, they weren't able to continue on it. And we had Colin Bell had been originally our letterer for the book, and just based on his schedule, he was like, hey, look, I got to step back from this one so I can focus on Spencer and Locke. And, thankfully I had heard good things about Ariana in terms of her lettering. And actually our previous colorist had introduced me to Liz. And so I thought that was sort of, a nice way for us to sort of hand the baton over organically. So yeah, it's, I didn't know anybody before we put this together, is I guess my long way of saying this. For me, I try to sort of write the scripts out, at least the first issue, and at least the treatment. And then I start looking at different artists to see, like, who don't I know? I always find that the people you don't know, it becomes like, it becomes fun, because then you get to work with them as they're sort of finding their own voice artistically. And so I like working with, like, the cool new artist you haven't heard of yet. Maybe that's just sort of my philosophy of, like, I still see myself as still kind of young and new in my career.
Interesting.
I mean, like, just like me and Jorge, like, I'll know that he and we came up in the trenches together. And so, like, he and I, like, we'll always have that bond. And, I feel the same way about Gavin, is that, like, this is his direct market debut. And I'm so happy and proud to have even a small role in that, because he's going to be the guy in 5 years who probably won't return my calls. He'll be too busy. It's exciting to sort of find these new wells of talent and sort of be able to kind of help share them with the world.
Cool. On a whim, earlier, just a few hours ago, I sort of asked social media if they had any questions for you.
Yeah.
Somebody responded. Writer Russell Nolte. Mm-hmm. He asked these two questions. The first one is, how is the promotion of your second series different from your first?
Mm-hmm. Well, so it's a great question. So I saw Russell post these, and I was really excited to answer them because it's so different. And interestingly, it's not so much based on what I'm doing as much as the environment around me has changed. We came out in our original series came out in 2017, so we were promoting that end of 2016, beginning of 2017, and boy, the environment has changed so much, and that certainly makes promotion. It's always a challenge, and so it's just different challenges that you have to deal with. You look at, for example, there's been a lot of consolidation amongst the comics news sites, and in terms of what they are willing to cover. I feel like 2 years ago, sort of promoting a scrappy, audacious Action Lab book was easier than it is today, just because there are sites that are so driven by clicks now that if you can't hit the number of clicks of an image book, then they might say, well, you don't resonate enough with our audiences, which is that's a tough road to hoe. Having come from the opposite side of the equation, I know from experience that people can get kind of bogged down by the never-ending fire hose of comics promotion. So I understand that, but I do think that sometimes there's a little bit too much focus on what's our clicks versus, is this newsworthy? Call me old-fashioned. That's always sort of the thing that drives me when it came to coverage. Is it newsworthy versus will this get a lot of clicks? There's also there's a lot more publishers out there. I feel like when we first promoted our original book, Vault was only just getting started. I feel like Aftershock was only just getting started. We certainly didn't have TKO or AWA or Ahoy or any of sort of the new players that have popped up over the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. And just like comic sales, comics promotion, the pie is not getting any bigger. There's just more places dividing it. And so, it's a matter of just staying vigilant and, talking with people and, just sort of maintaining your contacts and not getting sort of bent out of shape when certain opportunities that were the case a couple years ago aren't the case 2 years later. I can say I spoke with a website just this week who they told me, oh, hey, like we actually kind of switched focus where we don't really do promo anymore. We just do long form critique. And honestly, that made me feel a lot better. It can be very easy to fall into that trap of, oh, is this personal? And no, it's just there's a lot going on at any one time, and it's incumbent upon creators to just sort of keep hustling, keep grinding, sort of plan out different windows of coverage for yourself. Do you cover things during your announcement? Do you cover things when pre-orders start? Do you cover things during your sell-through period, just before the issue drops? You're always sort of thinking about what windows make sense for you. So I wouldn't say I've done a whole lot differently. I think it's just trying to perfect the things I was doing before, just trying to do them better. Something I was really bad at that I've sort of been learning now is that you can repeat messages, which is kind of something that might be a no-brainer, but for me was always kind of a tough sell was, oh yeah, like if you get a good review, it's not that you don't have to just post it once and then it vanishes into the ether. Like this is something that you can refer to, not every day, but you can sort of cycle back to on occasion. And I think that's something that I think is good for both our media partners, the people who have taken the time to promote us and the people who have taken the time to review us. And it's good for us too, because, coming on my end, it's easy to forget that, oh, well, I've posted this story, so of course I've read it. But, half of our readership might not have. You're at the mercy of whatever Facebook's algorithm is, or Twitter's algorithm is, or Instagram's algorithm. So, it's beyond that, it's kind of staying the course. It's trusting in your concept. It's trusting in your team and their product. And, just trusting in your readership as well, and that comes from that counts on both a customer side and the press side. I think having been on the other side of the table, I know that I was desperate for books that I really just liked, that I really resonated with. What they don't tell you about being a comics reviewer is it's like a kid in a candy store if like half the candy was rancid. And that was the reason why I wound up writing a comic in the first place, was I hit a patch where I wasn't responding to almost anything. And I thought, well, okay, smart guy, why don't you write a book of your own then if you put your money where your mouth is. And so, I think just trusting in our in the reviewers that have given us a shot before, that I'd like to think, if nothing else, we're consistent. And so people like you who you guys really liked our first arc, and so being able to say, hey, like, we got this is volume 2, it's very similar to the first arc, only the scale is much bigger and the world is much bigger, and I think ultimately I'm satisfied with the coverage we've gotten just by that as a result.
Cool. I think maybe just to maybe clarify a little bit, maybe Russell was talking about going to the chapel versus Spencer and Locke. So
to piggyback on that a little, because I know he had also asked sort of, how does it feel to have juggle 2 series at once?
Right.
And I, it's funny because I almost don't see it that way, because and maybe when we get a little closer to Chapel's pre-order dates, it'll be a little bit more of the juggling factor. I see it as staggering. I'm able to talk about Chapel in interviews now, which is cool. It's been hard not talking about it. But I don't consider that as pressing right now as Spencer and Locke, just because I prioritize on what's most pressing right now. In terms of the differences between promoting each book, the process is the same, the messaging is different. It's still very much a numbers game. I joke that I met my girlfriend through online dating in New York City, and I feel like that is perfect preparation for the comics industry, and in particular comics promotion. Because you got to send a lot of emails to a lot of people, and you can't just do a one size fits all kind of, copy and paste. Like, you have to actually personalize it. Being able to say, hey, I listen to Hall H, like, can we chat about this? It's very different than I've seen, I've heard of creators sort of doing kind of a blank BCC to everybody. And, while that's good for like sort of a last ditch email, like, you've emailed everybody and here's a reminder, here's the review PDF or whatever. Mm-hmm. Some creators kind of see that as the one size fits all, and then they get surprised when nobody's listening. Right. I would say, there's of course a difference in messaging between Spencer and Locke and Chapel. Because Spencer and Locke, we're able to say, first off, it's a continuation of, a successful Ringo Award nominated series. It was an audacious series that, people, I think all over the place were saying, I wonder if they can stick the landing. We stuck the landing. And so now being able to say, hey, you like what we did with Calvin and Hobbes, we need to see what we do to the rest of the funny pages. There are pros and cons to that, of course. There are some places who, justifiably say, all right, well, we gave the first volume a shot, but like, are we that interested in a sequel? Especially one that's, 2 years after the fact. I get it. Like, it happens. There was really no way for this to come out any sooner than it did, and still maintain the level of quality that readers have come to expect from us. But for the most part, we've been able to retain a lot of retention and attention just by saying, hey, we're back. We're back and we're bigger than ever. Chapel, on the other hand, is a brand new animal. But it's a brand new animal that I think appeals to what I might even argue a wider demographic. By being able to say, hey, this is a romantic comedy that both men and women can enjoy. It's an action-packed crime rom-com. that's something that people who, for whatever reason, weren't biting on Spencer and Locke, people have responded to Chapel in that regard. And that's been really exciting. I mean, I can say at C2E2, I had convention exclusive copies of Spencer and Locke 2 and Going to the Chapel, and Chapel was the first thing to fly off my table.
Oh, wow.
I think this is, and I think this speaks to comics as a whole, and particularly with the demographics that they serve. Is, I think women are underserved. I think people who like romance are underserved. And that's just in general, based on, people also just want they want ambitious books. They want books that have their own point of view, their own sort of artistic direction to them. That's something that I think the indies do really well that the big two struggles to catch up on, just by virtue that it's those are two companies that double ship everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's much harder to sort of have consistent artwork and a strong point of view when you got to do twice the work in half the amount of time. So I think it's very different messaging, but I do think that the process is the same. And so far I've been really happy with it. And also on top of that, I think being able to stagger the series as opposed to having them directly on top of one another, I think that's helpful. I think that that means that I don't have to feel bad about, am I neglecting one book to serve the other? No. If anything, we're sort of, this conversation is a great example of it, where, it's great to talk about Spencer and Locke 2 because it's pressing, but I also consider it to be a nice warm up for Chapel, because, once we're, sort of in the thick of things, whether it's in pre-orders or it's sort of the sell-through, I can talk to more people about it and just say, hey, remember us? We're back. Like, the book is out, and here's what we can say about it.
That's really good points. Both Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel are published by Action Lab. What's it like working with Action Lab, and can you maybe describe the pitching process?
Sure. Well, Action Lab, the thing I like most about Action Lab is they don't put on any airs in terms of what they publish. I think there are a lot of places that get very self-conscious, either in terms of sort of what is their brand, so to speak, or what do they think the hard numbers of a book is going to be. And so I think they get a little hamstrung, and they wind up not printing books that could be kind of cool. And I feel like Action Lab has never once sort of hesitated and saying, oh man, like what's the dollars and cents going to look like on two unknown creators, or what's the dollars and cents going to look like on a rom-com action thing set at a chapel. No, they were just like, they focus on, does this book look cool to us? Like, is this a book that we would want to read? And if the answer is yes, they go for it, which is, really kind of cool and liberating for me as a creator. And the other thing that I really like about Action Lab is, similar to Image, they're not kind of mucking around with your work. If anything, once you've sort of gotten through the submissions process and they've approved the book, they're really not asking, they're not bugging you until, they're asking, are you going to hit deadline? But beyond that, they'll give your book kind of a final read through to make sure you're not, throwing anything too egregious and awful into it. But I can tell you, for Spencer and Locke, they didn't change a thing. There was not a single thing that they told us, oh, you can't do that. Which I think any other publisher would have either said, oh no, you can't do this, or maybe some less reputable places would have been like, oh yeah, push this even harder, which is wouldn't have worked for our book. It would have blown up in our faces in a really big and nasty way. It was a very tightrope kind of act to walk for a series like this. And, I give Action Lab a lot of credit for trusting in its creators to walk that walk. Yeah, I mean they're a really terrific company, and I think they're a company that doesn't get, I think, the buzz that they necessarily deserve. Because I think there's a lot of cool books coming out of Action Lab. And I'm hoping that Spencer and Locke can be one of those books that and Going to the Chapel can be one of those books that people say, oh yeah, like Action Lab like really kind of can punch out of their weight class sometimes. And they've been really wonderful to work with. The fact is that a lot of publishers, especially with Going to the Chapel, a lot of places who you would consider to be very progressive, balked in the book. And that kind of blew my mind because I would think that a ton of publishers would want, a female-led, diverse, cast, romantic comedy action book. You would just think on paper, these are things that people say that they want. And yet you have a lot of publishers who, for dollars and cents reasons, sort of put the money before their artistic values. Action Lab doesn't do that. And so I give them a lot of credit, and I really respect the hell out of them for doing it. And, I always thank, people like Dave Dwanch, who, pulled Spencer and Locke out of the slush pile. I owe that man my career, and so I'll never let him forget it. Brian Seaton, our publisher, who, immediately was like, oh yeah, Chapel, that sounds great. Let's do it. In fact, my funny story about the process for Chapel was I told Brian about Going to the Chapel, and I sent him our pitch, and then I saw him at a con. I think it was WonderCon last year. I saw him, and I said, "Hey, Brian, like, any word on Chapel yet? Because I know it was going through sort of the submissions process." And he goes, "Oh, didn't we greenlight this already?" And I was like, "I don't know. Did you greenlight it already? Like, send me a contract. Let's do this." And so C2E2 of last year, they officially sent us the contract, and I was like, "Oh my god, yeah, they're going with this." So I really like working with Brian. The fact that he trusts me to just kind of get the work out, the fact that he trusts that I will put something out of a professional quality. That's huge, especially for kind of a young up and coming creator. That trust and latitude really means the world to me, and I know it means a lot to my collaborators as well. It's almost something that's been forgotten, is that sometimes there's something to be said for just hiring good creators and then letting them do their thing. I think in this day and age, it's so easy to want to sort of stick your finger in every pie, so to speak, and sort of, kind of backseat drive the process. And it's not to say that there aren't good editors. I've worked with some really good editors on some other, on other pitches and other projects in development, and they've given me terrific notes. But I think there is sometimes a trend of editors who they've got an idea of what the book is going to be, and that's not really what that shouldn't be the goal. The editors should be, the writers and the artists are the ones driving the product. They should just be the ones saying, okay, based on this vision that we, have agreed to print, what's the best way of us helping you get to that point? It's a little cart before the horse sometimes. And so, Action Lab, I really give them a lot of credit that they remember that it's creator first.
That's awesome. If you had a chance to give some sage advice to the David Pepose that was just starting to embark on his comic book creation journey, what would you say?
First, keep going. It's, I mean, really, if I could go back in time, the thing that I regret is not the right word, but the thing that always surprises me the most is how long it took for me to do this. I had tinkered around in writing for a while. Really, I mean, I got a creative writing minor in college, and I did a lot of short scripts that no one will ever see. Once I graduated, but it took until I think it was 3.5 years ago, 3 or maybe 4 years ago, that I finally had the gumption to try this. But at the same time, I think there's something to be said for sometimes you're just not ready. I feel like creators have to kind of, spend, gotta bake a little bit, before they're ready to deliver, the work that they were meant to do. Otherwise it was, I picked up a lot of advice when I was starting, and I think that really helped me out a lot. And so I guess I'll share that to your readers or your listeners, because for me, the things that really helped me learn how to write, one was, I think it was Greg Pak who told me this, is that when he started writing, he sucked terribly at it. He was like, I was terrible at it, but I gave myself permission to be terrible at it. And so he would write, and then he would, finish, which is hugely important. And then once you've written something and finished it, then you can can compare it to stuff that you actually like. And you can figure out what the overlap is with what you've written, what you like. And you can slowly start to kind of build it up where, like, okay, most of this stuff is stuff that I like. Giving yourself permission to suck and a lot of repeat attempts at sucking are really good ways to build as a writer. I wrote, I think, a short script a day for something like 3 months straight. And it was like, I think it was like 6 pagers or 8 pagers, something really short, but just beginning, middle, twist, cliffhanger, and resolution. It just helped me figure out the structure and not be so precious with my ideas. The other big advice that I like to give, I read this in a Joss Whedon interview, and it changed the way I write, is the words dessert first. And what I mean by dessert first is you don't have to write in order. In fact, I never write in order. I usually kind of get a sense of what the intro is, and then I immediately jump to, okay, what's the ending here? And then I kind of work my way backwards through there. But dessert first, you write the stuff that excites you first. What's the stuff about this character or this concept? Or are there any sequences that you had in mind? Write those all down first. Because if you find that there's a lot of stuff that you're excited about, then you've already written a significant chunk of your story. If you haven't written very much, then maybe this isn't a story that has legs, and then you've kind of, you've gotten it through your system and you can move on to something else. But I often find that, when I write dessert first, I've written enough stuff that I can then fill in the blanks for the rest of it. I've built up enough momentum that I can get to the finish line. And so those are kind of the big key bits of advice that I had to pick up getting started. And then, beyond that, it's just, what's the human component to your story? What's the thing that's going to make a stranger care? If you can't really describe what the human element is to your script, then it's probably not fully baked. Spencer and Locke is about, everybody's got bad stuff in their pasts, and how does that affect us, and can we get past it? It's a pretty, I think, universal thing, even for happy people, whereas Chapel, it's a story about commitment. It's about what does it take to make that leap of faith to say till death do us part. Because love is a great thing, but it can be a really scary and confusing thing too. And I think that's something that people can also resonate with. It's finding that kind of human core to your story that makes it more than just spectacle in my mind. So that's really kind of the thing that I always try to remind myself of when I write scripts.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Of course. You were an intern at DC Comics, became a comics journalist, and are now a beloved indie comic writer and creator.
Oh, thank you.
What's next for you? What does the next 5 years look like?
Oh man, I think it's doing what I'm doing, but expanding it. I'm at that stage in my career where I'm really happy with the work that I've done, but I'm not satisfied with how much of it I've done yet. And some of that is I'm still sort of building my muscles as a writer. I'm fortunate enough that I'm satisfied with the stuff that I put down once it is put down. I'm not satisfied with the speed at which I do it yet. And so that's something that I'm excited to build up, because I want to expand my output. I'm doing 2 series this year, which is great, but I'd love to sort of expand my frequency to doing 3 or maybe even 4 creator-owned books a year. That would be kind of like a cool a frequency to get it at, and then also I would love to diversify, my writing platforms. I'm out in Los Angeles. I'm represented now, which is great. Getting into film and television. I see, writers like Brian Edward Hill, for example, as a real inspiration. Where, he's never stuck in that sort of feast or famine routine. He is always sort of able to kind of, he's focusing on his comics, but he's working in the Titans writers room last year, and I think you can pull a lot of different storytelling techniques from different platforms that you write for, and so I'm always looking to diversify, and I'm always looking to sort of I've written pilots as samples, and but at the same time, comics are my first love, and I think about this probably more often than I should, but I think about my 5-year plan of, all right, what books do I want out in 5 years? And, then I think of the logistics of how am I going to carry all these books to conventions? And how am I going to carry to conventions?
Well, if you need help, I'll help you carry them.
Thank you. You'll thank you for being my Sherpa on that. I think about sort of the logistics of how am I going to up my game, at every convention. Because I think comics, you're kind of like a shark, where if you're not evolving, you're gonna die. And it's one thing to say, there are always going to be periods of development time, where there's going to be time where I don't have a book out because I'm getting a book or 2 in the pipeline. That was sort of my 2018 was I was getting Chapel and Spencer and Locke 2 off the ground. As well as my upcoming Top Cow book, Grand Theft Astro, and right now that's sort of what I'm working on right now. Is we're finishing Chapel and we're promoting Spencer and Locke 2, and we're in the early production stages of Grand Theft Astro, and shopping around other pitches. So it's just doing what I'm doing, but more of it. That's kind of I'm fortunate enough in this stage in my career that I don't have to do books that I don't feel passionate about, and I don't have to compromise on them, and that's something that I plan on playing that to the hilt. That's why I like working with Action Lab, is that they have never once asked me to compromise on the quality of a book, and I think that's to everybody's benefit. So 5 years from now, I hope that I'm doing what I'm doing, just more of it.
Okay. I know you're a busy man, but do you have time for a thunder round?
Please, let's do it.
All right. My first question is, I know you love pizza. Does pineapple belong on a pizza?
No. Sorry. For some people, just not for me.
I'm sure growing up in New York, that has something to do with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I grew up in St. Louis, so for me,
okay.
My pizza tastes are probably a little different from everybody else's. Huge fan of St. Louis style pizza, which is largely reviled in the rest of the country. So if you ask me if Provel cheese belongs on a pizza, my answer is yes, 100% yes.
Cool. In Shazam, Barry Batson yells "Shazam" to transform into a superhero. What word would you use to transform into a superhero?
Oh man, probably Provel.
And what kind of powers would you have?
Oh man, if I could, I used to say super speed, but now honestly, like either teleportation or just the ability to clone myself.
That's a nice one.
Yeah, I need it. I need this system.
We usually ask guests, if you could have a meal with anyone dead or alive, who would it be with and where would you eat at? But for you, I'm going to sort of tweak it a little bit.
Yes.
I'll ask, if Locke was to have a meal with anyone dead, alive, or imaginary, who would it be with and where would they eat?
Oh man, I'm going to be self-indulgent, and I'm going to say it should be with Emily Anderson from Chapel. And I think it needs to be in the chapel, because I think poor Locke is, I love him as a character. I love him to death. One of his many fatal flaws is he tends to put women up on pedestals. And, there's, Emily's got some kind of, she's going to have to play both sides in chapel. And so I think Locke would deeply underestimate her. And it'd be kind of fun to see them eating wedding cake while Emily's trying to pull a fast one on him.
The last time we had you on, I asked you, what would you do if I gave you $1 million? But this time around, I'll ask you, what would you do with $100?
Oh, $100. I'd probably just put it towards my coloring budget. That's a lame answer, but yeah, I'd get a couple more pages colored. Yeah,
you gotta do what you gotta do, man.
yeah.
If you had a chance to go on a one-way trip back in time to change an event, what event would you change?
Oh man, boy, that's deep. This is going to be a cop-out, but, barring sort of, big mass tragedies, I'm sure nobody would say, oh, I wouldn't stop 9/11. Honestly, beyond sort of major historical events, I don't know if I'd change anything. And this is something that I think about a lot, because I've sort of drawn on sort of past, heartache in terms of my series. And I realized that, as painful as some of those moments were going through them, they really they made me who I am. I'm in a good place in my life that I don't think I would have been cognizant of or ready for had I not gone through these moments. So, this is something we actually talk about a little bit in Spencer and Locke too, but scars have meaning, and they remind us of what we've survived to get to where we are today. So I guess if I could go back in time, I'd tell my mother not to sell my Marvel shares. That's about it.
Nice.
Yeah, but otherwise, I stand by my life, scars and all.
Since you mentioned rom-coms earlier, I'll ask you this question. You encounter a crash-landed alien from another galaxy, but you're too busy promoting your books, so you don't have any time to hang out with him. What rom-com do you have this alien watch while you're out promoting your books?
Oh man, that's a tough question, because all of my favorite rom-coms are the twists on them. That wouldn't be the ideal one to give them. If that's the case, there's only one real choice, which is When Harry Met Sally.
Nice, that's a blast from the past.
If you had to show an alien only one romantic comedy in the entire genre of romantic comedies, that's the archetype. That is the romantic comedy. My problem is I love deconstructions of it. So, but of course, an alien would not understand that. And they would be like, why are these tears coming from my face? Why did you show me Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? So rather than sort of start an intergalactic incident, I will just do with When Harry Met Sally, and the aliens introduce them to the wisdom of Nora Ephron.
Nice. I don't know why, but when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking of Benny and June for some reason.
Yeah, that'll go over well with our new intergalactic overlords for sure.
You're at your favorite comic book shop and you meet a kid that is new to comics and is wanting some advice on what comics to read. What 3 comic books would you recommend?
Ooh, what 3 comics would I get for them? The Flash, Terminal Velocity. Let's see. The first J. Michael Straczynski trade of Amazing Spider-Man. And boy, that's a tough one. I would say Daredevil, The Man Without Fear by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr.
Cool.
I know that JR just got 2 of my books, but he's super talented. Actually, you know what? I will sub out Daredevil because I'm getting a little heavy on my Marvel stuff. I would say Batman: The Long Halloween.
Okay.
By Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. Those are sort of 3 of my favorite comics. Those were actually the first 3 comics that I gave my girlfriend to read. They're really terrific. I think they're really accessible, and I think most importantly, they have a real heart to them. I think if you don't like those books, I'm not sure you would dig comics. And some of it's me being a little nostalgic because those were some of the earliest trades that I got when I got started. It's also things like Batman Nightfall or Death and Return of Superman. Those are like kind of fun, like over the top adventures. But I think when you're looking at sort of balancing the action with the heart, those are 3 books that I think they still really stand up.
Cool. Thank you for those recommendations. The last question for the Thunder Round will be, I know Kiss from a Rose is one of your favorite songs, and is the song that you told me last time that you would use to close down the karaoke joint. If you were to sing a duet with Rylend Grant, what song would you want to sing?
Oh, man. My favorite duet, and Rylend's welcome to ride shotgun with me. It's Tribute by Tenacious D.
Oh, nice.
That's my favorite duet, karaoke wise. But he'll have to wait until I bring down the house with Kiss from a Rose, because that's my go-to karaoke jam. That is me boiled down into one karaoke song. This is just a tribute. You know what I mean?
Right. We have a segment of the podcast called Superhero Shoutouts. Is there any person or group of people that you'd like to send a shout out to?
Yeah, well, there are a couple people. I'd love to give a shout out to my parents. For their undying support of me going to this crazy field. I promise that the parents in Spencer and Locke are not autobiographical. Or the parents in Chapel. And of course, a shout out to my girlfriend Claire, because yes, she is my first reader, my editor, my muse. And of course, without her, this career would not be a thing. And I'll give a little shout out to my writer's assistant Holly as well. She's my 15-pound terrier who's sleeping at my feet right now. I write extra hard so I can give her a good life.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. And again, thank you for all your support for Spencer and Locke and for going to the chapel. And, for anyone listening, please just tell your local comic shop to order our book, because that ultimately makes or breaks indie books like ours. And, we want to do more. So, tell your local comic shop the demand is there.
Is there anything that we missed that you'd like our audience to know about?
No, if you want to follow us on social media, you can follow me on Twitter. It's Pepose D. You can follow Jorge at Jorge Santiago Jr. At Twitter and Instagram. Gavin Guidry, it's one word all spelled out, on Twitter and Instagram. And then you can follow the books, Spencer and Locke. It's just one word and is spelled out. There's a silent E at the end. That's on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or Going to the Chapel, it's Go to the Chapel, just one word spelled out, also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And that way you can find all the latest news on both of our books, as well as our handy-dandy pre-order codes for people who are interested in ordering.
You mentioned your third book. Is there any social media accounts for that one?
Yeah, Grand Theft Astro. We are also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's been pretty quiet because we're still at very early stages of production on it. Because my super talented artist, Jorge Perez, is coming off of Queen of Bad Dreams over at Vault, which is coming out this week, I believe. I believe he's got a stint over on a Dynamite book coming out as well. So, yes, Jordy is getting started on pages as we speak. But yes, you can also follow Grand Theft Astro. It's just one word all spelled out.
Awesome. David, I look forward to, talking with you again in the near future.
Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you at a con soon.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess we'll close out the show. Thank you so much for tuning into the Hall 8 Show podcast, where we love showcasing independent comic book creators like David Pepose. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent creators, we would love a rating, hopefully 5 stars, and a comment on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please share our episodes using hashtag HallHShow. Peace, cheers, and if you would like to recommend a guest for our show, please reach out to us on social media or our website, hallh.com.